Good evening and welcome to the June 10th, 2021 City of Roseville Planning Commission meeting. Pursuant to paragraph 3 of Executive Order N2920, executed by the Governor of California on March 17th, 2020, and as a response to mitigating the spread of coronavirus known as COVID-19, the Planning Commission meeting will allow members of the public to participate and address the Planning Commission during the open session of this meeting. Public comment may be submitted by telephone during the meeting and prior to the close of public comment on an agenda item by calling 916-774-5353. If you call, you may be placed on hold until the attendant can answer. The broadcast is delayed up to 30 seconds when watching at home. When your call is transferred, you will have 3 minutes for public comment on items not on the agenda and 5 minutes in which to speak to a regular agenda item. Your time will be monitored and you will be informed when you have 1 minute left to conclude your comments. If you're listening to the meeting while calling in, please turn down the volume on the meeting in order to avoid interference. When calling, please do not use the speakerphone option as it may create difficulty for the Planning Commission to hear your comments. I will now call the meeting to order. Lupi, could I please have a roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Caparuso?
Here.
Commissioner Krafka is absent, excused. Commissioner LaBrea?
Here.
Commissioner Martin?
Here.
Commissioner Pryor?
Here.
Vice Chair Jensen?
Here.
And Chair Rashears is absent, excused.
Okay, would you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lupi, can we please begin with staff introductions?
Lupi Nelson, Recording Secretary.
Good evening, Chair Jensen and Commissioners. Greg Bitter, Planning Manager.
Joe Speaker, Senior Deputy City Attorney.
Welcome, Joe.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and begin public comment. Public comment is a time for anyone who would like to address the Commission on an item that is not on tonight's agenda. Public comment may be given by calling 916-774-5353. When addressing the Commission, please state your name for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes. If you're in the audience and would like to address the Commission on an item that's not on the agenda, please come forward and fill out a blue card before doing so. Staff will give some time to see if there's any phone-ins.
Yeah, Chair Jensen, we'll give it about 35 seconds to see if the phone's ringing. I don't hear the phone ringing in the back, so it looks like we have no public comments on the phone line.
Okay, with that, I will go ahead and close the public comment period and move on to the consent calendar. The consent calendar consists of routine items that may be approved under one motion as recommended in the staff reports. However, each item may be considered separately upon a request by the audience, Planning Commission, or staff. To request that a consent item be considered separately, the public may again call us at 916-774-5353. Tonight's consent calendar consists of one item, the minutes from the May 13th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Staff, is there anyone phoning in or anyone in the audience that would like to pull this item?
Once again, Chair Jensen, we'll give it about 30 seconds to see if the phone rings.
Use some music.
Looks like there's going to be no public comment on the consent calendar.
Okay, with that, do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar as listed?
So moved.
Second.
Justin? Second. There, got it. Okay, Lupi, could I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Caparuso?
Yes.
Commissioner LaBrea?
Yes.
Commissioner Pryor?
Yes.
Commissioner Martin?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Jensen.
Yes. Okay, now we'll move on to requests and presentations. Next on the agenda, before we begin, I want to review the meeting procedures. First, we'll hear the staff presentation. Then we'll take initial questions from the commission. I'll then open the public hearing, and the applicant can make a presentation if he chooses to do so. Then I will open the public comment period to allow the public an opportunity to speak. I will then close the public comment period, and the applicant will be given an opportunity to provide a rebuttal to any comments that he has heard. I'll then close the public hearing. The commission may then ask questions of staff, and then finally the commission will consider the item and make a decision based on the information provided in the report from staff and the testimony presented during tonight's hearing. As a reminder, public comment may again be given by calling 916-774-5353. Again, if you call, you may be placed on hold until staff can answer. When addressing the commission, please state your name for the record and limit your comments to 5 minutes. First item on the agenda is item 6.1. It's a request to approve a tentative subdivision map and development agreement amendment for 5800 Market Street. For the record, file number PL20-0248. Charity, could we go ahead and have your presentation, please?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. It's nice to be back. This evening, I'll be presenting the Sierra Vista Specific Plan CG1 and CG20 Tentative Subdivision Map and Development Agreement Amendment. So the project is located on the west side of Market Street, north of Baseline Road, and within the Sierra Vista Specific Plan. The project is surrounded by open space to the south and east, low-density residential development to the west, and high-density designated land to the north. A future park is planned adjacent to the western side of CG20. The project includes a tentative subdivision map for a low-density subdivision on CG1 and a medium-density subdivision on CG20, with a total of 159 residential lots and associated landscape, right-of-way, paseo, and open space lots. Development Agreement Amendment is also requested to transfer the affordable housing unit obligation from CG20 to CG31. The low-density subdivision on CG1 consists of 115 lots with a typical lot size between 6,300 and 14,850 square feet. The subdivision will be accessed from Sierra Village Drive with a connection to the developing subdivision to the west. A trail will be constructed adjacent to the open space in the southeastern portion of the site, and walls and fences will be constructed along the subdivision's perimeter. The medium-density subdivision on CG20 consists of 44 lots with a typical lot size that is between 3,300 and 6,400 square feet. The subdivision will be accessed from Sierra Village Drive as well as Market Street. As required for medium-density subdivisions, this project requires a design review for residential subdivisions to be approved by Planning Commission before building permits can be issued on these lots. This requirement is included as a condition of approval. The subdivision layout and street design have been reviewed by the city's engineering division and the fire department and are adequate for circulation and emergency response. The subdivision design, including the locations of walls, fences, and trails, is consistent with the requirements of the Sierra Vista Specific Plan. The project includes a request to transfer 20 middle-income for-purchase units from CG20 to parcel CG31. These units will be transferred in the form of 10 very low and 10 low-income rental units. The proposed transfer does not require a specific plan amendment because it occurs between parcels located within the Sierra Vista Specific Plan, and the ability to produce affordable units within the specific plan, they're sufficient to meet their goal. Pursuant to the specific plan, the units may be transferred administratively, but with approval by the Director of Housing. And as detailed in the staff report, the Housing Director has approved the transfer, and per the specific plan, the transfer is to be memorialized by way of a development agreement. The proposed development agreement amendment will also allow for modified development standards on parcel CG20 and amend section 2.6 to reflect the transfer of affordable housing units from CG20 to CG31. The transfer will also be documented on table 5-3 of the specific plan affordable housing chapter, and no change to the number of units that will be built on these parcels will occur. The proposed development agreement amendment is consistent with the general plan, the specific plan, the zoning ordinance, and will benefit the city by adding 20 affordable units that will count towards the city's regional housing needs allocation. Notice of the proposed project was distributed to the Arcona, and a notice of the Planning Commission hearing was distributed to property owners and residents within a 300-foot radius. No comments were received. The project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to Section 15182, which exempts residential projects that are consistent with a specific plan, and the project is consistent with the general plan, the zoning ordinance, the subdivision ordinance, and the community design guidelines. Will result in orderly development and will provide a benefit to the city by adding units to the city's regional housing needs allocation. And based on the staff report and as presented this evening, staff recommends that the Planning Commission take the actions listed in the staff report and approve the tentative subdivision map and recommend that City Council approve the development agreement amendment. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Charity. Commissioners, are there any initial questions that you would have of Charity or the city staff? Okay, seeing none, I'll open the public hearing, and I'd like to invite the representative for this item to address the commission.
Chair Jensen, I know the applicant was going to call in, and I haven't heard the phone ring, so if you'll indulge me for 1 second, we'll try and see if we can get him on the line.
Some Jeopardy music, Justin?
I was going to put it on my phone.
I guess we'll get to learn something new tonight. The applicant is on the phone, and we're going to get him transferred right up here. Kevin? Can you hear me, Kevin?
Yes, I can.
You're on with the Planning Commission. You can go ahead and present to the Planning Commission.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, good evening, Planning Commission. Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kevin Weiss. I'm the developer of the property that's on the agenda right now, and we are looking forward to moving this thing forward. As Charity has mentioned, all of the plans have been reviewed. We have agreed to move the affordable component to the high density part project where it makes more sense. And I'm open to having any questions from anybody that it's related to the project.
Thank you, Kevin. Commissioners, are there any questions that you have at this time with the applicant? Okay, thank you, Kevin. With that, I'll now open.
Thank you, Kevin.
I'll now open for public comment. Public comment may be given by calling 916-774-5353, or if in the audience, you may come forward and fill out a blue card. As a reminder, you will have 5 minutes to address the commission on this item, and we'll give it a few minutes to see if we have any phone calls.
Chair Jensen, that's been about 35 seconds, so it looks like there's no public comment on this item.
Okay, commissioners, are there any additional questions that you have of staff at this time? With that, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Would anyone like to make a motion or have any comments on the item?
I'll go ahead and make a motion. I recommend that the City Council approve the development agreement Amendment 5800 Market Street, SVSP PCL CG and CG20 PL 20-0248, and adopt the findings of fact as stated in the staff report and approve the tentative subdivision map 5800 Market Street, SVSP PCL CG-1 and CG-20 PL 20-0248, subject to the 83 conditions of approval.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Lupi, could we please have roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Martin?
Yes.
Commissioner Caparuso?
Yes.
Commissioner LaBrea?
Yes.
Commissioner Pryor? And Vice Chair Jensen?
Yes. Okay, moving on to item 6.2. This is a request to recommend that the City Council adopt Roseville Municipal Code, Chapter 19.65, restrictions on tobacco retailers in Title 19 zoning, and amend the RMC Section 19.08090, 19.12.020, and 19.14.020 of Title 19 zoning to reflect the tobacco retailer use provided in the proposed Chapter 19.65. For the record, file number PL 21-0160. And I believe we have Ryan DeVore who will do the presentation, followed by additional city staff. Ryan, let's go ahead.
Thank you. If you could load the presentation, please. Good evening, members of the commission. I'm Ryan DeVore, Assistant City Manager. I'm here tonight along with a team from the City Attorney's Office, Development Services, and the Police Department to discuss our recommendation to place geographical restrictions on the sale of flavored tobacco. Last year, City Council directed staff to explore flavored tobacco ban in the city. Our effort was paused when state legislation enacted a statewide flavored tobacco ban, but was later challenged and received enough signatures to send the decision to the voters in November of '22. Considering the length of time before the statewide vote, staff moved to take action to address the problem now. We explored 3 options, including a flavored tobacco ban citywide, a retailer licensing program, and a geographic ban on flavored tobacco sales. Given the data available and legal considerations, staff is recommending a geographic ban. During our research, we communicated with various stakeholders, including Placer County, the Chamber of Commerce, school officials, and existing tobacco retailers. It's evident that flavored tobacco use is a significant problem among our youth throughout the nation, the state, and locally. The police department will share some specific statistics and firsthand experiences to demonstrate the problem. Thank you. They are doing great work to help both educate our youth and enforce existing laws, which includes a physical presence in local schools and decoy operations to ensure retailers don't sell flavored tobacco to our kids. In order to limit exposure and access to flavored tobacco near schools, Development Services staff will share the specifics of our recommendation to prohibit new tobacco retailers from selling flavored tobacco within 1,000 feet of schools. Staff will continue to gather data on the flavored tobacco problem among our youth and the role tobacco retailers play in exposure and access to this harmful drug. I'd now like to introduce Lieutenant Blinn and Officer Mason from the Roseville Police Department to share their thoughts and experiences. Thank you.
Good evening, Lieutenant Scott Blinn from the Police Department. So we'll discuss our youth vaping stats. We did some research on the topic, and we'll show you whatever we were able to locate, as well as discuss our high schools, what we're seeing in the high schools, the vaping trends, as well as what we're seeing in the junior highs, and then all of our tobacco enforcement efforts. So we'll discuss all of that. Next slide. So according to US FDA, 80% of our youth ages 12 to 17 and nearly 75% of young adults ages 18 to 25 who were tobacco users in 2014 reported that the first tobacco product they ever used was a flavored tobacco product. And then we also turned to the Healthy Kids Survey, which is something that they use in the schools to gather data. And the youth are significantly more likely to try and regularly use flavored versus traditional tobacco, and less likely to perceive the harmful effects associated with flavored tobacco. And then Roseville School Resource Officers. So we have officers in all of our high schools as well as in our junior highs. They routinely confiscate these large numbers of flavored and as well as traditional tobacco products. So we're seeing a lot more, a much greater amount of the flavored products versus traditional tobacco products. And then next slide. So then Officer Mason will discuss the current trends that he's seeing in the schools.
Hello, everyone. I'm Donald Mason. I'm a school resource officer over at Adelante High School, which is our continuation high school in our district. So I'm just going to report on exactly what kind of tobacco products we're seeing in the high schools and in the junior high schools, how they're receiving these devices, as well as some prevention efforts that we're doing within the high schools and the junior high school level. So some things that we're seeing, I put some pictures up here just to show you exactly what kind of devices we're seeing. I would say that both in the high schools and in the junior high schools, I would probably say over 95% of the tobacco products we're seeing are vape devices, flavored vape devices, and that's the general consensus on what kind of tobacco products are being used. I put a few up there for you to look at. A lot of them are real inconspicuous. You think of, the traditional cigarette is like, the staple, years ago, whereas now a lot of these devices are real inconspicuous. They look like USB ports, as you see the one on the right. You can't really tell whether it's a USB port or whether it's a vape device. The one near that to the left, it looks like a key fob for a car. A lot of them are disposable vapes. The one close to that, the left one, and then the far left is going to be, now they have devices that you can use as a drawstring to your sweater, and kids are getting brazen and in class, vaping in class, and the teachers really don't even know what's going on because the smell that is emitted is like a fruity flavor or a fruity smell, not your traditional, whether it's weed or normal tobacco smell that you would get. So that's what we're seeing and what we're confiscating at a very high rate. So the school districts, what they've kind of done, at least the high school district, they received a grant that funded TUPE, which is the Tobacco Use Prevention and Education. And so their slogan is fighting against vape. So any tobacco product that we confiscate off campuses gets referred over to TUPE, and they help with cessation, with tobacco cessation, as well as some education. They come on campuses at least once or twice a week, and they table at lunches, and they do fun games and stuff to kind of give the education behind the harmful effects of vaping and tobacco use in teens. So that's something that they've been doing in the high school district. And then so from the junior high, if we could go to the next slide. So from the junior high school level, we're seeing exactly the same type of stuff. The bad part is the way they're getting it is through social media platforms. If all of you are familiar, Snapchat is probably the biggest platform that we see. It's an easy way for these teens, whether they're in the junior high school or the high school level, to really send a message, a direct message to someone that they need a vape, or they'll post a story if they're somebody that sells vapes and they're considered a plug, or the middleman, so to speak, the dealer. And so, they can post a story, I have this many vapes available, meet me at, whatever park, and you can direct message them. By the time you close the app and reopen it, the message is gone. So it's really inconspicuous way of communicating back and forth. And it's what all the teens are using right now. That's the main platform. You still see Instagram, Facebook, but Snapchat is really what you see the most of in terms of how they're receiving the vape devices. In terms of who these plugs are, generally they are either of age, above the age of 21 or above, or there's like a gray area of, kids that are maybe 18 to 21 that may look older. But generally, it's the older brothers or sisters that are of age, and they have a high school age or junior high school age sibling, and they are the plug for their friends. And that's what we're generally seeing in how they are receiving those vape devices. So in the junior high school, what we're seeing is our school resource officer she's a floater for the junior high school. She does Brief intervention, so similar to what TUPE does in terms of vape cessation. If any vape device is confiscated on the junior high schools, then they get forwarded to our SRO for the junior high schools, and she does a brief intervention with them as well to help with vape cessation as well. And she also does presentations to parents to let them know, because as you see, some of these vapes are really hard to catch. Teachers really don't know. So she does a lot of education and presentations about the harmful effects and exactly what these devices look like and what kind of harm they can cause. If we go to the next slide. And then so at the police department, what we've kind of been doing to help with the prevention of vape use or tobacco use within our teens, we applied for a Department of Justice grant that funded our school resource officer position for the junior high school level. And so she floats as a school resource officer, but she specializes in the tobacco prevention efforts. And so she's our liaison with our county partners to be able to work with them to help prevention efforts. So right now, the law, it criminalizes the sale of vaping, but it doesn't criminalize a teen having a vape, which is counterintuitive, but that's what it is right now. So what we do is a lot of decoy operations, and that's what we've been working on to kind of crack down on the people who are selling, our retailers that are selling. So we've done one decoy operation in which we had 3 teens that went in to attempt to sell or to buy vapes from these various retailers, from vape shops or smoke shops, gas stations, our grocery stores that sell tobacco products. We were even in how we did our decoy operations, and we visited 20 stores. Out of the 20 stores, none of them sold to our teens, which is a good thing in terms of they're abiding by the rules. We do plan on doing 2 more decoy operations coming up here in the summer. And we're going to continue to do that to make sure that the retailers are not selling to our teens. And so along with that, our school resource officer for the junior high school level, she also has a collaboration with our California Department of Tax and Fee. And so what they can do is come in and audit these retailers to ensure that they're abiding by all the rules in terms of how they're receiving their tobacco products. And if they're not, then they can get a fine. If they don't want to collaborate with us and do the audit, then they could be cited for a misdemeanor. So those are just some of the ways that we're able to, crack down and make sure that we're doing our prevention efforts and making sure that everybody's abiding by the law. And that's pretty much what we've been doing. So we're going to bring up Mike Isom, who's Director of Developmental Services, and he's going to talk about the ordinance.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Mike Isom, your Development Services Director. Now that you've heard the background regarding the problem and how we came to the conclusion of proposing a geographic ban, the next logical question is how do we implement it? And I'm sure a question on all of your minds, why is the Planning Commission involved? Really, in order to enact a geographic restriction, we need to rely on the city's authority to regulate land uses. And that authority is in the general plan and the zoning ordinance, which the Planning Commission has purview over. So in this particular case, we're proposing to add an entirely new section of the zoning ordinance, 19.65. It's aptly named Restrictions on Tobacco Retailers. We're also proposing some minor revisions to other sections of the ordinance. Really, it's just to add a use type and definition of a tobacco retailer and then to specify the zone districts where tobacco sales are allowed. So relatively minor changes in other areas of the ordinance. So the nuts and bolts really under the proposed ordinance, no tobacco retailer would be able to sell, offer for sale, or possess with the intent to sell a flavored tobacco product or tobacco product flavor enhancer if they're within 1,000 feet of an existing or designated public, private, or charter school. And when I say designated, obviously we have new growth areas where properties are still vacant, but they're designated for future school sites. So that's what I mean by designated school site. We're proposing to measure that 1,000-foot distance radially from the property line, so from the property line basically to the front door of the retailer. And we did that as opposed to property line to property line because we didn't want to be overly punitive and basically disqualify an entire commercial center if, further away it was outside of that 1,000-foot distance. If we had gone property line to property line, it would have completely disqualified that commercial center. So we thought this was a better balance. I do want to be clear that the proposed ordinance would only apply to new retailers that are proposing to sell flavored tobacco products that would be located within 1,000 feet of schools. And I want to make this distinction because if it's a tobacco retailer that's not within a 1,000-foot buffer, it's a new retailer, they can sell the flavored tobacco products. It only applies to schools, to retailers within that 1,000-foot boundary. So new retailers within the 1,000-foot buffer of a school. Existing tobacco retailers that are lawfully operating if this ordinance were to become effective would no longer meet that distance requirement would be allowed to continue to operate as they currently do today. So if they already sell flavored tobacco products and they're within 1,000 feet of schools, they can keep doing that. They just can't enlarge or expand the scope of those flavored product sales. So they can continue to do that unless the use is abandoned for a period of 90 days, 90 continuous days. So if they shut down or left town or whatever for 90 days or more, that non-conforming status goes away and they would no longer be able to sell flavored tobacco products in that location. Next slide, please. So for consistency, we took this definition directly from the Health and Safety Code, California Health and Safety Code. So flavored tobacco products is any tobacco product that contains a constituent that imparts a characterizing flavor. So in this context, a constituent means any ingredient, substance, chemical, or compound other than the tobacco itself that is added by the manufacturer during the manufacturing process. And then a characterizing flavor means a distinguishable taste or aroma, and again, other than the tobacco itself that's imparted by that tobacco product. So examples of this are fruit flavors, chocolate, as Officer Mason said, the sweet candy type of flavors, the popular ones in the schools. But I do want to stress that this also does include menthol. Menthol is a characterizing flavor and would be encompassed by this geographic ban. And the definition, or the state's definition and ours, it does not apply to loose leaf tobacco or premium cigars. So on the screen, this map is also included in your packet, is a map that shows the location of all licensed tobacco retailers and known school sites, and along with their corresponding 1,000-foot buffers. And if you look at developed areas of the city, primarily the central and eastern parts of the city, you can see that there will be situations where retailers, if they already offer flavored tobacco products for sale, would become legal nonconforming in this respect. So I counted 17 locations citywide that fall within that 1,000-foot distance that would become legal nonconforming under this ordinance. And while this ordinance does apply citywide, we were particularly focused on the new growth areas, generally the areas west of Fittement Road, with a few exceptions. These commercial properties have already been slow to absorb, so we're particularly sensitive to enacting new land use regulations that may have the unintended consequence of burdening commercial development or potentially hindering future commercial development. And on the next slide, you can see just kind of a close-up view. What we found when we did this land use analysis is that 1,000-foot buffer for those school sites basically grazes, it just touches 4 commercial properties in Sierra Vista, one of which is the Baseline Marketplace at Fitiment and Baseline. But it would also fully encompass parcel, that should be JM41, not FD41, but it's a Moyer-owned parcel on the northwest corner of Market and Sierra Vista, Vista Grande. And then further north up in the Fitiment Ranch neighborhood, parcel F6D would be completely encumbered by the 1,000-foot buffer, and then parcel AR52 in Amoruso is about 50% encumbered. So I called all of these landowners personally and had a conversation to get their feedback, and none of them felt that this proposed ordinance would have an effect on commercial viability. In fact, the tenants that they're pursuing either don't sell tobacco or flavored tobacco is just not a huge component of their sales. So they didn't express any concern beyond that. With respect to the grazed parcels to the south, again, we felt that measuring on a radial distance gave landowners flexibility to potentially site those uses elsewhere on their commercial property so they would maintain that 1,000-foot distance from schools. And we felt that this best balanced the public policy intent of maintaining the separation of these sales from schools, but also not unnecessarily burdening commercial property viability. So as Ryan mentioned, we did a significant amount of outreach during our research efforts. In general, I think it's safe to say that all stakeholders agreed that youth and young adult access to flavored tobacco products is a significant and growing problem. I don't think there was any argument there. Most agreed that the ordinance is well-intentioned in its goal towards curbing its use and is a good first step towards addressing the problem. However, I will note that the Chamber of Commerce sent a letter which we emailed to you yesterday. You should have that in your packet and also a hard copy in front of you. The Chamber voiced concern with the ordinance, specifically with the city's decision to choose to regulate specific products being legally offered for sale. And they voiced further concern that the city may go farther in the future. And I don't see Wendy Garrick here tonight, but I just wanted to convey that on the Chamber's behalf. Note that we also sent individual letters to all known tobacco retailers. There were 94 individual letters sent out, alerting them to the proposed ordinance and to seek feedback. We sent these out in May. We did receive, I got 2 phone calls from vendors. I know one, if not 2, are here tonight that would like to speak with you. And then lastly, since it's a citywide ordinance amendment, we did, per state law, publish a 1/8 page legal notice in the Roseville Press Tribune. So we did try to get the word out on this. In conclusion, the intended result of this ordinance is to stop the increased exposure of youth and young adults to flavored tobacco and to stop the expansion of new flavored tobacco sales within 1,000 feet of schools. And these proposed restrictions are generally similar to those enacted in some of our surrounding communities, namely Rockland, Loomis, Auburn, and Sacramento. And in fact, Rockland has taken, or they've enacted a geographic ban very similar to the one we're proposing, but they took it a step further by also setting separation requirements between the retailers themselves. So in addition to being 1,000 feet away from schools, no new retailer could locate within 1,000 feet of an existing retailer. We didn't take it quite that far. Loomis banned the sale of vaping cartridges and e-cigarette juice, and they also banned new retailers from selling any tobacco product within 1,000 feet of schools. So again, they took it a little bit further. Auburn enacted an outright flavor ban citywide, and then the city of Sacramento also implemented an outright flavor ban, and they also implemented a tobacco retailer licensing program, but they also had data to suggest that a significant amount of retailers were selling these products to youth, which allowed them to do that. And if you have questions on Sacramento's, I'm sure Ryan can answer those. So enacting a geographic ban is clearly within the public interest and is explicitly intended to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. And as such, staff concludes that the requisite findings can be met for adoption of the zoning ordinance text amendment, and we respectfully request that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council adopt the proposed ordinance. That concludes our presentation, and any one of us are available to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to staff. Commissioners, are there any initial questions that you would have of staff at this time? We'll go ahead and start with you, Justin.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for the presentation. Could we pull the slides back up, please, and go to that slide that had one of the first slides that had the 3 different paths that could have been explored. And I just want to understand why, because I keep hearing in all the conversations I've had this week, this is a good first step, but I don't know what the next step would be. And if we go to the slide.
Slide number 1, please. Just beyond the title slide. Keep going. Keep going. All the way back.
They're not numbered this time.
One more. There you go.
Okay, so 3 options. Flavor ban citywide, Sacramento and Auburn did that, the licensing program. Why did we not choose, if this is, undoubtedly, I believe it is a huge problem. I'm a father of 4. It's not something that I take lightly, but why did we not move forward with a full ban?
I'm going to bring Joe Speaker up to speak to that.
Good evening, Commissioners. To answer that question, so we looked at the legal impacts with regard to those three bans, and there are constitutional takings clause and equal protection clause issues associated with a citywide flavor ban as well as a tobacco retailer licensing program, and specifically that would be because we would be regulating existing retailers. So part and parcel with what we presented was the fact finding that we went through and the data that we gathered, and it's was presented to you that our existing retailers, at least during the decoy stings, we didn't have the sales to the minors. So we were targeting a path that didn't have a negative consequence for the existing retailers, because at this time, the existing retailers, at least from the data we have, appear to be following the law. And we want to continue to encourage that following of the law. So in looking at the citywide flavor ban, there would be no way to enact that without having consequences on the existing retailers. And the same with the tobacco retailer licensing program. What that is, just for clarification, is essentially a license that every tobacco retailer in town would have to obtain and pay a fee associated with that. Auburn's is $850 a year. City of Sacramento's is $370 a year. And they would have a licensing program that then carried with it certain rules about hours of operation, types of machinery that could be used, et cetera. But it would result in an impact to the existing retailers that we have here in town. The geographic flavor ban that we proposed was the option that didn't have that impact on the existing retailers, and we saw as that kind of a putting a pause on the new growth and new expansion of flavored tobacco products within that proximity to schools. And to answer your second part of your question about, well, what about the next step? Our hope is that we don't have to take a next step because we continue to not have the sales amongst retailers, and we see a decline amongst our youth. That's what we want. At the end of the day, we're happy to see that retailers aren't selling to youth. That's exactly what we want to see. But kind of as far as what is taken next, that's going to be wholly dependent on what data we continue to gather. As we do those decoy operations, if we start to see the retailers selling to decoys, then that would then justify the data that I talk about for a citywide or a tobacco retailer. But we're not there yet, and we will continue to look for that data, and our hope is that we don't find that data because we want, obviously, to be no sales to minors. So hopefully that answers your question with regard to that.
It does, yeah. And I think, I appreciate the decoy operation. I think that is data that we found, right? And we're looking to solve a problem. If we're finding that, kids are not getting it from retailers, yet we're going to ban retailers, there's a disconnect. I also think, we talk about a good first step. We're either serious about this, or I don't think we are. We either take a full sort of ban towards it. I think it's well intended, but I think adopting this ordinance at this point is really saying that we're comfortable with the current level of the abuse of this in the community. I mean, if we're saying all it's going to do is maintain the status quo, we're not solving a problem.
So if I could respond, I don't know if that's a question or kind of a comment, but
you can respond. Yeah.
I was just going to say that part and parcel with the sales is also the exposure piece. So one of the things that we see consistently with studies is that limiting the number of retailers reduces the overall exposure, and that's both primary and secondary effects, right? Everything from, if you've ever been by a tobacco retailer, signage in the windows, safe routes to school, having, tobacco retail signage, devices, et cetera, as students are walking to school. So minimizing all of those. So there's not only the sale component, but there's also those secondary sure. aspects of it. So that's part and parcel with it. And then at least the understanding and the data from the jurisdictions that have passed similar type ordinances, the data suggests that limiting any number of retailer locations, whether that be pausing the existing number and limiting expansion, but limiting any retail point has an overall positive benefit to the overall reduction in youth use. Eliminating that expansion, if I will. So I understand that it kind of puts a pause, but limiting that expansion has a positive impact on overall use by limiting those access points. So that's the thought process behind that.
And then, Greg, when has the Planning Commission, because this is an odd item for the Planning Commission, it's sort of a workaround, it feels like. So when has the Planning Commission really kind of, has the Planning Commission ever waded into sort of this restriction on business operations through an ordinance?
Well,
marijuana.
I was going to say, marijuana is the best example right off the bat. I mean, we have 2 chapters on that for both cultivation and dispensaries. So we limit. I mean,
and adult businesses, adult-oriented
businesses, sure,
as well.
Sure. Yeah. No, this is the appropriate location for a geographic ban, the zoning ordinance.
And so we were saying, you said Sacramento, Auburn, Loomis, Rockland all went a step further, or Auburn did not? No, Auburn has a full
Auburn
ban.
has the strictest ordinance in Placer County. So Auburn has the total flavor ban citywide. They also do have a retailer licensing component as well with an $850 annual fee to the retailers. They grandfathered in any existing site within 1,000 feet of schools because they also have a ban on new retailers within 1,000 feet of schools. And they grandfathered in the existing retailers, but they have a total citywide ban. And then Rockland has the same 1,000-foot geographic ban, but then also one within amongst retailers themselves, which we're only proposing the geographic distance. But Rockland's bans all tobacco products, not just flavored. Ours is narrower to the flavored because that's the harm that we're seeing. And then Loomis bans the vape cartridges and e-cigarette juice, which is a very narrow definition that they chose to utilize. And then Sacramento has a total citywide flavor ban and a retailer licensing program that's $370.
And I agree with you on the exposure piece, but in the presentation earlier from the police department, the exposure really comes from social media as well, and that's not going to be limited through this. Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Pryor, do you have any questions of staff?
Question for Officer Mason, I think if that's possible.
Get out of the seat.
You spoke earlier about decoy operations and seeing if there were sales to underage customers, and you said you found no examples of the existing retailers, but
Correct.
yet it's still a huge problem, and you stated earlier that the problem was mainly older siblings of legal age purchasing and then selling on to younger age customers.
Correct. That's what we found.
I'm trying to understand, how would you target those older siblings?
Well,
Since they're not breaking the law technically by purchasing through the retailers, and how would this geographic ban affect those older siblings purchasing? I don't think it would.
I think that's where it comes to just a little bit more of an education piece, because I think what happens is we have, families and parents who don't really know exactly. They either know that vaping exists and they don't think it's as harmful as like your cigarette, or they don't know at all because they see a device that looks like, a USB or a highlighter, and they don't even know that it exists. So it's more so the education piece and getting the parents to kind of understand what their kids are doing and what they're involved in and the keys to look for, and hoping that that would help with the prevention as well, just the education as well as the enforcement piece, if that makes sense.
I don't know if you can answer on behalf of the police department, but
If you want.
So,
would you find a geographic ban helpful
so,
for retailers?
So basically, what's happening, how they're getting it, there's a myriad of ways they can get it. You can buy it. You can buy some of these things online, or anyone who's under the age of or over the age of 21 can actually buy these items legally. So that's where he had spoke about earlier. If they look 18 to 21, hopefully the retailers are carding, but they can legally buy that and resell it to the minors is what we're seeing. So there's a myriad of ways that the juveniles can actually get that. Does that answer your question?
It does, but my question is, would a geographic ban on these be located within 1,000 feet of schools?
So we also have planned to do a shoulder tap operation. What a shoulder tap operation was, the police department would go out there, we would deploy a juvenile, and they could go up to people that are in and around the business and ask if they can buy, the tobacco product for them. And that's another enforcement tool that we're looking at doing this summer. Does that make sense to everyone on the committee, what a shoulder tap is? Mm-hmm. And then the police department would come in and cite the adult or the person who was able to buy it legally, and then turn around and sold it to a juvenile. So it's another enforcement tool that we're looking at. So,
Thank you.
Commissioner Pryor, if I could follow up, one of the purposes of the ordinance, in addition to preventing new retailers, in the growth areas, obviously, but it's to prevent an overconcentration of retailers within the city. again, to Joe's point, just trying to limit the access, the availability, for someone that can legally buy a product in proximity to the school, turn around and sell it. So it does have the effect of preventing the expansion or enlargement of existing retailers. It would prevent new retailers from locating, especially in some of the established areas of the city in proximity to schools. So do we think that a geographic ban would be effective? I think it would certainly be effective in helping to prevent the expansion of the sale of the product within the city.
And how many different areas does it affect? I mean, how many locations? I thought it was like 4 or 5 possible new locations for new retailers.
Well, those were the vacant properties that I pointed out that would be either touched partially or wholly by one of these 1,000-foot buffers. But there are 94 retailers citywide. Not all of them sell flavored tobacco products. Okay. And we'd have to delve into the data on who sells the flavored tobacco products. But I did count at least 17 retailers, existing retailers, that would fall within a 1,000-foot buffer of any particular school citywide. So that's the numbers that we're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Mike's up. Sure. Okay, sorry, Mike. So you had mentioned overconcentration. It doesn't address a global overconcentration in the city of Roseville. It just addresses an overconcentration next to schools.
In proximity to schools, that's correct.
Right, okay, just to clarify.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner LaBrea, any questions to staff?
Yes, I wanted to ask about the enforcement of not allowing existing retailers who already sell within that radius, that they can continue to do so as long as they don't expand their sales. Is that enforceable really, and in a way that will be, I guess, a good use of our resources?
Yeah, so the enforcement will fall to development services under code enforcement's purview. Code enforcement is a part of development services. So what we'll need to do, if this ordinance is implemented, we will need to go and, well, first of all, identify the retailers within the 1,000-foot distance to schools, and go survey them and ask visually verify if they sell flavored tobacco products. If they do, we would document something like the amount of shelf space that's dedicated to it, or if we have access to the data, perhaps the total gross sales, or whatever that winds up being. We'll document that at a point in time after the ordinance gets adopted, and then code enforcement would conduct periodic inspections throughout the year of the various non-conforming locations, just to make sure that use hasn't expanded. Okay. That's how that would work.
And do you know how many non-conforming retailers there are at this time, or?
Well, and like I said earlier, there are at least 17 retailers within 1,000 feet, existing retailers within 1,000 feet of schools. We have not yet gone out to each one of these retailers to verify if they are indeed selling flavored tobacco products. So if the ordinance were adopted, that would be something that we would have to go immediately do and establish kind of that baseline for the nonconformity. Okay. If that makes sense.
Okay. That's all my questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Martin, any questions at this time?
Yeah, I do. I have a couple questions. So one of the items is it indicates designated school sites, future school sites, and you mentioned charter school sites are in there. So what if a charter school site comes into a location where an existing facility just went in the newer location of Roseville, planned location? How would that be addressed?
So for example, John Adams on Harding, right. That used to be an office complex. It's now a school, but it wasn't planned as a school site. It wasn't designated, but it would then create a non-conforming situation for any retailer that was within 1,000 feet of it. We don't see a lot of charter schools. John Adams is one of the largest. There are a handful of others. But it applies specifically to primary and secondary schools, so elementary and high school level. Preschools and things like that, we're not looking at.
Those are excluded, okay.
Correct.
But so then if a charter school comes in, then does it bump, or is that unit grandfathered in then based upon the verbiage previously?
It becomes a legal non-conforming use at that point.
Okay. And then cigars and open leaf aren't in there because it's just not, kids aren't interested in that kind of product.
That I can't speak to. Joe can probably speak to that.
That's fine. I was just curious about that. So some of the questions, and have come up are, it seems like this doesn't have a lot of teeth. Why aren't we matching what Rockland has, or some of the other, or Auburn being a citywide ban? If we're worried about a citywide ban because of legal reasons, how is Rockland getting away with it, or Sacramento getting away with it? And is that something that we could possibly look at if it's not this step, a next step? So that's a question I'd like to hear.
Yeah, and Joe has the numbers memorized, as a matter of fact. I'll have him come up and share that with you.
So again, kind of looking at those sales from retailers, Sacramento, when they enacted their citywide ban. So Sacramento has a citywide ban, and Auburn has a citywide ban. Rockland has what we would be proposing, which is 1,000 feet from the schools. But in Sacramento, they did those undercover stings like I'm talking about, and they reported just under 25% of their retailers failed those decoy stings. So those are the kinds of numbers that justify, in our opinion, legally, the citywide ban, at least easily justify the citywide ban. Rockland reported close to 17% of their retailers failing. So that's the kind of data that I talked about we were gathering, and we don't have those numbers, which is a good thing.
At zero right now, it is good, yes.
Yes,
yeah.
Which is a good thing, but it's those numbers that prevent us from taking it further at this point.
But we do have those numbers. I mean,
what's that?
We do have the numbers from the first sting, which is zero.
Yeah.
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 And then just to thank you very much.
Yeah.
The concerns that some of the commissioners had about locations and 1,000 feet from the schools, but we could also possibly, other options are distances from each other as well, which other districts have. And then there was motion or not motion, but there's talk about it's most everything that the kids are doing is from siblings or from social media. Social media is the big thing. I have a senior who just graduated this year and a now junior. Went to one of these program seminars that the Placer County put on at the school, and my wife and I turned to each other and we're like, oh my gosh, this looks like so much fun. We should start vaping because they make it seem so appealing, which is very frustrating as a parent. The concern is, we're a very business-friendly city. We want to make sure we keep advantages open for business to do what they want to do. But as a parent, in a society, we want also, it's a balance. We want to have, we don't want these young minds to be compromised with certain elements that, as a society, we potentially don't agree with. Social media is more of a parent-based item that they're controlled in their houses, but once the kids step outside their houses, they're exposed to the local store here, the local store there. And so as a city, if we are available, we can possibly put some restrictions or limitations. So that does control some of the potential elements that our kids or other students are exposed to. So those are things that we have to consider and look at as we're thinking about this issue. So that's about it.
Thank you. Joe, I do have just a couple questions for you. The citywide ban that was done in Sacramento, did that eliminate the sale, or did it just create existing non-conforming uses, but it didn't allow any new ones within the entire city?
They banned everywhere, including existing retailers. And they set a time period to go into place. So they started their effort back in, I believe it was 2017, and then they had a kind of a lengthy time period for the implementation so that existing retailers could essentially wind up their operations before going active with theirs, which I believe was January of 2020. So their data is still fairly new in Sacramento, but they applied it to everybody, including the existing retailers.
So they eliminated the ability for anyone, even existing uses at that point. And the data,
for flavored tobacco.
And because they had the 25% number, that gave them the cover, as a good choice of words, to allow them to go ahead and move forward with that.
Exactly. They were able to link that harm directly to their retailers. That's
Okay.
correct.
The other question I have is, where is the state at now on this going to a statewide ban?
So in August of 2020, the state the governor signed SB 793 into law. That was set to take effect on January 1st, 2021. And there was a referendum, so the requisite number of signatures gathered for a referendum. That referendum halted the implementation of it, and we're currently in that referendum, and it has to go to the voters at the next general election, which is November of 2022. So that law is written, but it is paused until the voters can vote on it in November of 2022.
And so at that point, the city would be bound
That's
to
right.
that, and there would be no sale within the entire state.
That's correct. So if the voters vote on that, then that would be a statewide flavor ban, including Roseville. So what we would have would be preempted by that state piece. There's a component in 793 that allows jurisdictions to be more restrictive than the state, but not less. So we would be preempted by the state's flavor ban.
And the reason I ask is that would seem to address the chamber's comment in their letter, is it creates a level playing field across the entire state with existing and future businesses
That's
going
correct.
forward. Okay. That's all the questions I have at this point. And now I'll go ahead and open the public hearing and the public comment period. The public comment may be given by calling 916-774-5353. And as a reminder, you'll have 5 minutes to address the commission on this item. And I know we do have some folks in the audience that want to speak on this, so if you'll come forward, you'll have 5 minutes. And please fill out a blue card and state your name for the record.
Okay, so my name's Mark Strow. I'm a franchisee of Arco AMPM. I own the location at Foothills and Pleasant Grove Boulevard. So, I want to start by saying this has been a great conversation. I've learned a lot from what we've been talking about so far, but some of the facts aren't as I understand them. And one is, we want to make sure that we understand that it's the city of Sacramento, it's not the county of Sacramento. And I didn't hear any communication regarding that. And I think that that's an important part because the county of Sacramento is right outside of Roseville's door. Also, the problem I heard was it was vape. And in our stores, the feds already have banned flavored vape. So if this product is coming from us as retailers, then ultimately we're not allowed to sell it. And frankly, we should be policing stores who might be selling illegal product. So I just want to make sure we point some of those things out. We're opposed to the ban. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Dochakara. A couple of the comments that I want to make was I want to applaud City of Roseville. When you have 100% approval rating with there being decoys. My name is Kenny, and I deal with several different cities and stuff. Like you're saying earlier, is the cities that have problem. So if we don't have a problem, why are we creating a ban? Why are we creating another hurdle for a business person? And they were saying earlier is that future development, an average AMPM costs $4 million. Average Tom and Dick Harry's liquor store costs $500,000. So if tobacco is being a hurdle in City of Roseville, average retail store sale is 30% of tobacco sales. An AMPM, a future Chevron, and things like that, they will have to consider it twice and 3 times before opening in City of Roseville. So as a small businessman, we want to, of course, follow the rule as your city retailers are, 100%. And what problem is media, problem is the social media. So we should be going after them rather than restricting the retailers. And I understand with the restricting the future retailers, as long as the retailers are doing their job, because we're selling the legal product to the older people who qualify, why are we putting into unnecessary hurdles? And as far as the Sacramento, he had said was 25% decoy. The federal government had, or the California government had, their status was 94.5 retailers were not selling to minors. So as a small businessman, my only request would be think about things before we're putting in necessarily more hurdle, especially with COVID and everything else we're dealing with, that so many businesses, including one of mine, that I had to close because of COVID. And so thank you for everything you're doing, and I appreciate all the effort, but at the same time, and I would also request is reach out to retailers as stakeholders when you're making these decisions that affect us. Because a lot of the retailers are working 60 to 80 hours a week, and sometimes they're not, just like even tonight. Not many people showed up, just me and him showed up. So it's not something that easily that we can come to because we don't have a lot of employees. Most of the retailers that are working 60 to 80 hours a week themselves. So in the future, whenever something is happening, I would appreciate, because City of Elk Grove, that's what they had decided to do, was that create a stakeholders where you have retailers, not only the Chamber of Commerce. Most mom and pop are not members of Chamber of Commerce. I wish they were. It would make a job easier for all of us, but they're not. So whenever you're reaching out to the stakeholders, please make a little extra effort to small mom and pops, because most of them, this is their life savings. So if I have a store that's worth $500,000 and I lose 30% of my sales for whatever reason, well, it just went down the cost of $200,000. So my children's inheritance is just out the window for $300,000. So I appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to address this item? Greg, do we have anyone on the phone?
Oh, looks like we do. Hello, you've called into the City of Roseville Planning Commission. You can state your name and speak to the commission.
Thank you. Good evening, Commission. This is Twyla Laster. I am the Project Director of Saving Our Legacy, African Americans for Smoke-Free Safe Places, also known as the SOUL Project. The tobacco industry pours millions of dollars a day into in-store marketing to entice customers with their addictive and deadly products. In areas where there are more tobacco retailers, there's a larger number of places where smoking products can be purchased, which increases youth and young adult smoking rates and leads to higher rates of illnesses, disease, and death. When considering race and socioeconomic status in neighborhoods, the industry increases predatory marketing tactics in partnership with retail establishments to ensure product purchase. As a result, young people and communities of color suffer disproportionately from health outcomes of smoking, either by adult to youth sales, online sales, or other. The referendum on Senate Bill 793 allows tobacco and vape industries over a year and a half to hook our most vulnerable populations into lifelong struggle with addiction. Additionally, the FDA just recently ruled to ban menthol. Until this legislation happens, over 300 cities statewide has adopted currently flavored restriction ordinances, several without grandfathering retailers who sell these products. The City of Sacramento Code Enforcement worked closely with the SOUL Project to limit access legally by restricting the sale of menthol and flavored tobacco and updated their tobacco retail licensing program, which solved the problem of potential harm, school proximity, and other issues. Sacramento, San Francisco, and Davis are great examples of legal retailer licensing, education, sales restrictions that limit access and lower availability to smokers, potential smokers, and those who want to quit. So menthol in itself helps the poison go down easier. 69 of those chemicals are included directly that cause cancer and specifically mask the harsh taste of inhaling that hot smoke into the lungs. And also those candy-flavored products do the same. So the more toxins that you take in, the more addicted you become, and no mistake about it, when these products that are legally used as intended, at the very least, cause respiratory issues, and at the worst, kill over 7 million citizens on an annual basis. And of course, since the pandemic, smokers and people that vape are at increased risk for lung conditions, which put them at higher risk for severe illnesses from COVID-19. So over the past 20 years, retailers have adapted their business models to accommodate these type of changes. And most recently, they've already placed these deadly products by selling healthy foods and other items which benefit the entire community and potentially can make up and exceed profit loss from selling these deadly smoking products. So we appreciate the interest that you have in protecting the health of the residents in Elk Grove. I've provided several research papers and articles to your Senior Deputy City Attorney, Mr. Speaker, to share that provide more context on the points that I've raised. So thank you for your attention and your thoughtful consideration. This concludes my public comment.
Thank you. Greg, do we have any other calls?
Let's see. Good evening. You're on with the City of Roseville Planning Commission. You can address the commission now.
Oh, Yeah, my name is James Allison. I'm calling with the California Fuel Convenience Alliance, representing California's gas station and convenience store retailers. Today I'm calling in to represent those that, unfortunately, based on this ban that is being proposed, are in Roseville. While this ban that is being proposed certainly does go a little less business restrictively than some of your neighboring cities may, we certainly echo the concerns that are being shared by the Chamber of Commerce and other business groups that this will be a stepping stone to take this further. So, to be totally frank, we're discussing that we're attempting to stop a problem that we can all agree does exist. However, the success that's seen in the city of Roseville as far as 0 instances of retailers selling to use during your SIG, as well as the state of California's Department of Public Health data showing that convenience store retailers have a 95% success rate in preventing sales to minors. So this tells me one thing plain and clear, that these stores are not the problem. These stores are not contributing to this epidemic. What we've heard earlier today also includes that social media is a huge proponent and a huge issue when it comes to this problem. Snapchat especially. So when we're looking at this problem, we need to be comprehensive about it. Let's take a look at cities like San Francisco that have had nearly 2 years that their bans have been in place. There is 0 data, statistical evidence, or what have you, that would indicate that there has been any measurable impact on the use of vaping products by minors. So what are we doing here? You know, at the end of the day, when we're talking about doing policy, you know, to attack an issue at large, we're really hoping to actually have some measurable impact. Plainly, this does not have measurable impact because it's not going after the proper source. It's just pomp and circumstance to say, yes, we've done something, we're trying. Unfortunately, it's not doing anything. You're not going to see the success that you want to see because you're not going after the root cause of the problem, which is the social media or online marketplace. You can still purchase these products online, even in localities where these products are banned. From there, they can be wholesaled by a Snapchat dealer, look, marijuana was illegal in the state of California for decades, and it was still propagated tremendously throughout the state. What we've seen is that this stuff is available. People can find it. And unfortunately, the safest route you can go is to actually have responsible retailers providing this product instead of pushing people to black markets. You know, we check more IDs than the TSA as a industry. And allow us to keep doing our job. Focus on education, as we've discussed. Focus on educating parents, educating youth of the risks these products have, but don't harm retailers. We're already reeling from the problems that have happened with COVID-19 and the issues that we faced over the last year. Allow retailers a competitive marketplace. While you've discussed that there are neighboring cities that have implemented bans like this, these haven't been implemented at the county, Placer, or Sacramento, which allows unincorporated stores to simply be able to retail these products. And now they have a competitive advantage over those cities that are. So just think about this when we're implementing bans like this, when we're going further, that there are far-reaching consequences. Stores can see cuts as much as 40% of their revenue if you have bans like this in place. Roseville is a business-friendly city. Don't allow it to go down a path that prevents it from being so. Thank you very much. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, James. Wait a second to see if we have any other callers.
Yeah, Chair Jensen, that's been about 40 seconds since the last caller, so I don't believe we're going to have any more call-in public comments.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close the public comment period. Staff is actually the applicant on this project, so would staff like to address any of the questions that were brought up? I did have a question that was brought up by Mr. Stroud regarding the cartridges that are currently illegal from the federal government and how that plays into this. Joe, maybe you could address that.
Yeah, so that reference that was made to that. So without getting too into the weeds on the laws that have changed recently, because there has been a lot of changes at both the federal level and at the state level. But what happened is at the federal level, technically the FDA has the primary authority to regulate the marketing of products. And the FDA, for whatever reason, never exercised that authority. So products entered the market without having FDA marketing approval. And this happened for close to 6 years before the FDA last year said, we're actually now going to start exercising our authority to regulate the marketing of these particular types of products. And so as a result, there was an initial pause. And when I say initial, I'm talking this was April of last year, pause on those products entering the market until they received the temporary FDA approval, but that has since resumed since then. So there are, I believe, some products that didn't have that, but there are still products that have had that and are in the market on the shelves today. But that's why I believe what he was referring to is that there was this temporary pause where the FDA decided to start utilizing that authority. But part and parcel with that, the FDA just announced last month that they are moving to ban menthol cigarettes as well. And so there's also discussion about how the FDA is going to implement that ban with regard to the vape product. So that may be also the reference there, but that's what was being referred to there.
So when the FDA goes to ban that, that would be more than statewide, that would be countrywide. Is that?
Yes. So the FDA's ban on, although the FDA's focus is on at least what's proposed is menthol cigarettes. And so, again, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but back in 2016, the FDA moved to ban all flavored products. At that time, the only flavored products that were on the market were what you would consider a traditional cigarette, but with a flavor. So menthol, a Swisher Sweet, any of those kind of cherry flavored. And so the FDA banned that. But what happened is then the evolution of the product became the electronic cigarette, which got around the FDA's definition of flavored cigarette. So the FDA is looking to not repeat that. At least that's what we're seeing. And so when the reference to menthol cigarettes, there's an effort to not create that same loophole again with whatever the next device is. And that's primarily why our ordinance focused on the flavor rather than the device, because the device is always subject to change.
That makes sense. Commissioners, are there any other questions you have of staff? Okay, seeing none. Is there any other further comment? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Is there any further comments or discussion the commission would like to have at this point?
Do you mind if I add a couple things
Sure.
in response
Go ahead.
to some of the questions? One thing to note about the decoy operations, we were certainly pleased that none of the retailers sold to the youth. But a couple things to note. One, the operations were close to visits that were conducted by our officer who is part of the grant program. So she had recently been to the retailers, handed out her business card and said, I'm going to be here 3 or 4 times over the next year, so don't sell to kids. So it was in proximity time-wise to the decoy operations, but we needed to conduct one in advance of this in order to have some data. Also, our abilities are somewhat limited due to entrapment cases where we don't want to send someone in with a beard who's 19, right? These are middle school children, two middle school and one high school kid who were sent in. So that's something to consider as well. And then we've also learned that some of the retailers have code words which kids can use in order to bypass some of the decoy process. And then as far as product availability and the exposure piece, I know that question came up a few times. What research shows is that the product availability perpetuates the social norms about tobacco use. It increases the exposure to advertising, marketing, and promotions. And it's shown that the proximity to schools and density of retailers also is directly proportional to tobacco use. And finally, the increased brand recognition, especially among youth, increases the odds of smoking. So I just want to make sure that I shared that in response to some of the questions.
Thank you, Ryan. I'll give staff a chance to answer any other questions. I apologize for not giving you the opportunity to come forward. Is there any other comments that staff may have at this time? Okay, with that, I look to the commission for any further comments or discussion on this item. I'll start at the end. Commissioner Pryor?
I have no further comments at the moment, except to say that it's an extremely difficult task that we have this evening. I don't think we've had such a difficult task. I mean, we're to base our decision on the facts that are before us. So the study that was done is all we can take as being done. I mean, how that study was undertaken, how those sting operations were done, we had no... I understand that if you give a card and then you come a couple of days later, that of course it's going to be compromised. So, but we can only base our decision on the results of the study, and the study was 0 violations found. So I appreciate that there are always nuances in every study, so thank you for that. But I don't have any further comments at the moment. Thank you.
Commissioner Caparuso?
Yeah, I agree. This is a challenging discussion and a clear problem, not just here in Roseville, but throughout the country. I think, the operation and the fact that someone went in and, provided their card, that seemed to work. To the contrary of not having, people following up, it seemed to be that was successful to me. This is a large problem that I think requires a large solution, and I just don't think that this is the solution.
Thank you. Commissioner LaBrea?
Yeah, my concern is that 1,000 feet to me is not really a deterrent. I have kids who walk to school and they walk further just to get to school. So I think a kid that really wants to be exposed or get something they want will walk further than 1,000 feet. I also am concerned about the resources. If this doesn't really address the issue, where from the data we have today, it seems like the issue is really coming from social media, older siblings, not really so much from retailers, then having code enforcement have that added task to do the inspections and all the paperwork and everything else that has to go along with trying to enforce this, where they could be enforcing other codes that might have more effect, more impact to better our community. I'm concerned about that use of resources. I'm also concerned about, I feel like because it's only addressing new and not existing, and then there's some, extra conditions for existing who already sell, it just seems very somewhat like unfairly penalizing certain retailers versus others. And then, I don't want my boys to be exposed to flavored tobacco. I've had family members from the past who have suffered the consequences of tobacco use, so I certainly don't want that. But even in looking at the map and where the tobacco retailers already are, if we limit it in a way that's not more thoughtful and more developed based on data, I feel like there would be a lack of equity where there are certain neighborhoods that have more than others. The newer developments then have certain, better environments for their kids than the older neighborhoods or something to that effect, where then, what is that? I just feel like there's going to be unintended precedents or consequences if we don't do a more evidence-based approach to how we're going to deal with this problem. And I do think it's a very big problem, so I'm very thankful that the staff and the city is taking this seriously. As a parent, I really appreciate that. But I really would hope to support a solution that is evidence-based and seen to be more effective and more enforceable in a way that better uses our resources. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Martin.
No additional comments or anything, but just, the comments, some of the comments that came up, we've got primary elements and secondary elements. Secondary elements are, having a kid go past one of these spots within 1,000 feet. If we're limiting these types of elements within that 1,000 feet, those are X number of passes that this kid or person will not see that item. It won't be put in their face. They have social media they can get it from, which is unfortunate, but that's an impossible item for us to regulate as a city. I feel like this element has some good steps to it, but it just doesn't seem like it has good legs to it. But so it's just, it's a tough question that we have to face because we're trying to keep businesses thriving in Roseville, but we also want to keep our children who are closest to us safe. And, part of that dilemma is which way we go. And, like I said, going through that seminar from the Placer County, realizing how big of a problem it is and talking to staff and administration in some of the high schools and what they have to deal with, it's crazy. It's unfortunate is what it is. Our first pass as parents and guardians is we have to take care of our children first, which it seems like with some of these items, everybody has their idea and philosophy of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And we each have our own opinions, but as a society, we can try and regulate or promote elements that are better for our society as a whole and try and hinder elements that are degrading to our society. And I think this is a step in that direction, but I'm not sure if it's enough. I'd almost like to see more. So,
thank you, Commissioner. I just have a few comments. I agree with everything that's been said by the commissioners this evening. And I do want to thank staff for bringing this item forward because, to be honest with you, I was completely unaware to what degree this was occurring in the schools. And so I do hope that parents that may be watching this increases their awareness as well so that they can be looking for the hidden items that they use as the vaping devices, whether it be a USB hub or a fob for a car. Those are the things that I would have no idea that that's what it could be. So I do appreciate staff bringing that forward. I also support ordinances that I think can solve a problem. What I'm hearing from the other commissioners is I'm not sure that this goes far enough to do that. And I recognize the limitations that we have based on the data that we have. And I applaud the businesses that are in Roseville that we've got 100% that have not sold. I hope that continues. I hope they are watching this and seeing that that's a real threat to them if we go out later and we find out 25 or 30% of the businesses are not following the law, that gives the city another lever that they can pull to address this issue. But with the data that we have today, I'm not convinced that it solves the problem, and I think that it might create issues for staff with trying to enforce an ordinance as to which businesses are within 1,000 feet, which ones are pre-existing, which are legally conforming, how does this affect moving forward? And I love the question you had, Commissioner Martin, regarding if a charter school came in after a business was there, while we would say that's legally conforming, I could see a parent coming in and saying, your ordinance says you can't do that, and we've got an issue we have to deal with going forward. So I do have concerns as well as the rest of the commission has. But with that, I think we finished our discussion, and I look for the commission for a motion.
I'll make a motion that we recommend the City Council adopt the two findings of fact as stated in the staff report and approve the zoning ordinance text amendment 311 Vernon Street citywide restrictions on tobacco retailers PL 21-0160.
Just to clarify, the motion is to approve the geographical ban. Is there a second to that motion? Hearing no second, do I hear an alternative motion? I look to you, Greg, without a second. Does the motion fail, or do we need to take an action to disapprove?
Well, you are being requested to make a recommendation one way or the other to the.
So would an alternative motion be to not
recommend the city council
Yeah,
not
negative motion.
to not adopt this ordinance?
Is there an alternative motion by,
The motion just can't fail?
That motion can fail, but the item before you staff recommends that
Right.
you recommend to council. So you have to address that, the request to recommend to council. So there was a motion to do that, which there was no second. So from a rules of order, that failed, that motion failed. So now there would need to be, if the idea is to not recommend it, a motion in the negative to basically what's on there with not before it. If that makes sense.
Okay.
Although that motion does not have to pass either. I mean,
Well, that's what I'm confused about. So if that
Well,
motion
we-
didn't pass,
we-
and we can just, I don't understand why we have to make a motion in the negative. Why this item just didn't fail to pass.
Could we make a motion and go back to the staff for reevaluation?
With direction?
if you do that, we'd need some type of direction on
yeah.
how you would like to see the ordinance modified.
Could we make a motion for staff to do more data gathering that would support or better support this type of zoning ordinance?
That'd be a direction.
Would there be, is there a, I hate to put you on the spot, but I think staff would look for some direction on what type of data that would.
Well, if the geographic ban is for retailers, but from what we've seen, retailers aren't causing the problem of selling to the minors, then logically that data of 0 doesn't really back the evidence needed that makes this zoning ordinance necessary. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Perhaps a second study?
To do I'm not saying I support it or not, but would you want to do bring back to the planning commission for consideration when it hits percentage, on these undercover operations?
I guess this is part of the issue, I don't mean to interrupt, but part of the issue is technically staff can still proceed to council without the recommendation of the planning commission. That's why if you choose to do nothing, staff can still proceed forward. It would be over the,
and that's what I wanted to do. I mean, if it dies, you guys can take it forward without our recommendation.
Yeah. I guess from my perspective, you haven't technically not recommended it. You just haven't chosen to recommend it. I realize that's the default to it, but when we proceed to council, there's that piece of it. That's the only piece. So the directing staff to come back, the reason that doesn't necessarily work is because logistically staff can still proceed forward to council regardless. That's the component that needs to be addressed.
from my perspective, the way I'm looking at it is, does the commission think the ordinance as written should go forward? Or do we think it needs to be something different or not at all? That's the choices. And so we have to make a decision one way or another on that. Now, all the conversations we've had during this commission meeting, I'm sure the council's watching. I'm sure it'll be included in the staff report. So they'll have that context as to why we chose to approve the ordinance moving forward or not. I think I've been pretty clear. I have real concerns with the ordinance as it is written, and am not comfortable moving forward and telling the council we think this is good, because if we do that, we're saying it's good. So it's either good or it's not good, and it needs something different. So I would look to the commission to look at it in that lens and make a motion based on that and see if that.
Chair Jensen.
Yes.
If I may, to Joe's point about the negative motion, it's not unprecedented for the Planning Commission to send something on to the council with a recommendation for denial or that they not proceed with something. What the commission will typically do is provide a statement on why. We recommend that you not approve this ordinance amendment for reasons X, Y, and Z. It's pretty clear that the commission has concerns with the way the ordinance is drafted and the underlying data supporting it. I would recommend that you, if you so choose to take a negative motion, to send a statement that we can forward to the city council for their consideration and information on why you did not support approval of the ordinance.
So, listening to the conversation we've had this evening, I think there was a consensus among the commissioners that this is an issue and we'd like to see it addressed. I also think that there was concern among the commissioners that the data doesn't really support doing anything at this time. So maybe the motion is in effect that the ordinance is written, we're denying it because it doesn't have the data supported, but we encourage the council to work with staff to bring forward additional data that could support something that is more comprehensive, that addresses the issue more comprehensively.
That would certainly be within the commission's purview.
And I think that's great. And really targets an identified source of the problem.
Correct. I agree with that.
And also in a way that's enforceable without redirecting resources in a way that might not really be effective.
Looking at Greg to see if he's written some notes for.
I'm working. I think based on the commission's discussion tonight, there's what you've just said in the last 60 seconds plus the last half hour or so. There's a very all the thoughts are there on. I mean,
the record is.
I'm very comfortable understanding your concerns with recommending approval of this ordinance and why you think that the ordinance as drafted should not be approved. So I think the comments on an ordinance that more clearly targets the problem, an ordinance that seems to be more effective in its use of resources in targeting this problem. I believe those are a couple of the items that I would make sure that we make clear.
Targets the problem as supported by data.
As supported by data, I agree with that.
Yeah, and so I think we can put together, we can put that, we can help flesh out that motion. I don't know that
we could rewind tape on Commissioner LaBrea's statement because it was pretty eloquent.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to also reinforce the idea of equity where if you're penalizing only certain retailers versus others, I have a little bit of a issue with that just because I live in one of the older neighborhoods and there's retailers up and down Douglas Boulevard, and so then it becomes the neighborhood where they have the flavored tobacco, if the newer neighborhoods get less of that because of whatever ordinance ends up coming forward. So I would like equity to be considered as well.
I'm looking at you, Mike.
Well, the commission's comments and concerns are well documented. I don't know that we necessarily have to include all that in the motion. The motion could just be to recommend that the council not approve the ordinance for the reasons cited during the commission deliberation, the public testimony received tonight. And obviously, if this moves forward to council, we'll be sure to document all that in the staff report and make sure that all of your comments are addressed, or at least
when you say who makes the determination? I mean, isn't this going to them regardless?
Well, the applicant could technically decide to withdraw the application, and in this case, I'm the applicant. The city. That's a discussion that we'll have to have internally at a different day. But I would expect that we would probably take it forward to at least have the discussion. But obviously, I don't make that decision. I have a boss who has 5 bosses. So we'll see how that goes.
So we can make the decision. So we have not adopted this, but now we're having to do it in the negative with the ability for us saying we don't want this council to adopt it, and then maybe they won't even have the opportunity to discuss it.
I'm not committing to that. I would respectfully request that the commission take an action tonight, one way or the other. That would be my preference, so that if we do move forward to the council, we have a clear direction from the Planning Commission, which is an advisory body on this issue. You don't have to necessarily agree, or conversely, the council doesn't always agree with the Planning Commission on its decisions. So at least take an action to allow us the opportunity to move it forward to the council.
And I think to support what Mike's saying is your feelings on this ordinance are very clear to me. So I don't know that there should necessarily be a concern.
Right.
making a recommendation to not adopt the ordinance as written for the reasons that you've all discussed.
Well, I think one of the things that we may all be struggling with here is by taking a negative action, the perception may be in the community that we don't support measures that reduce the use of vaping. And I think we've heard very clearly from all of the commissioners, that's not it at all. What we're looking at is something that really solves the problem and puts the city in a position that it can actually enforce whatever comes forward. But the ordinance as written doesn't really do that, in my opinion, and I think that was the comments we heard from the rest of the commission. So to be clear to the public, we're not saying that we think it's a great idea to vape as kids. We're not saying that at all. We're just saying, does this ordinance help us get to where we need to? I don't feel that it does, and I look to the rest of the commission as well on that.
I was just going to say, so if I'm hearing correctly, I mean, essentially you're looking to not recommend the ordinance as proposed. I mean, it's fair, that simple, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we understand based on the comment the basis for that, but I mean I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth. I'm just trying to help craft a motion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's clear that the Planning Commission is not supportive of vaping in middle schools or high schools by minors, but that they don't believe that this ordinance is the effective way to solve that problem. I mean, that's kind of the simple, based on my interpretation of your discussion tonight.
Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and look to the commission to see if there's an alternative motion for our consideration.
I'll make a motion to not recommend that the city council approve the zoning ordinance text amendment in the way that it's written currently.
Do I have a second?
With the additions of what we just said about potential modifications moving up to the council. And I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, Loopy.
Commissioner Pryor,
Yes.
Commissioner La Brea,
Yes.
Commissioner Martin,
Yes.
Commissioner Caparuso,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Jensen.
Yes.
Thank you.
So this motion is approved, and it's a recommendation to the council. When do we expect that would be brought forward to the council?
I'm estimating the second meeting in July, whatever date that winds up being.
That's assuming that your boss's boss's boss says that it goes to the council. Okay. Okay, that's the end of that item. We'll move forward to board member, commissioner, staff report. Are there any reports from staff?
Yeah, I just have a couple quick items, Chair Jensen. So we will not be meeting on June 24th. We had one item, but we pushed it back to the July meeting. We will be having meetings in both the meetings in July. I think I sent you all an email to that effect. I would like to point out that the housing element will be coming before the Planning Commission at the second meeting in July. I can tell you that Commissioner Krafka his term expires at the end of this month. So unfortunately, his last meeting was the last meeting that we had. So I've already told him that I'm going to drag him back to say goodbye, since he's going to miss and we're not going to have a meeting next week or in 2 weeks. I also will report out that the Fitiment apartment project, the Fitiment bungalow project that you approved, has been appealed, and that'll be going to City Council on the 7th of July. So we're taking that forward. Also, I think Michelle already sent the email and we announced it, but Joe Speaker will be the representative from the City Attorney's Office supporting the Planning Commission and supporting the Planning Division from here on out. So we're happy to have Joe.
Way to jump right in there, Joe.
Yeah, yep. He wanted to start off with a bang, so he did. We're very happy to have him. And I think that's, also, it's traditional for the first meeting in July to elect the new chair and vice chair for the Planning Commission. So that will be on the agenda at the next meeting we have. And now that it looks like, I think it looks like things might be getting back to normal and we might be able to have a design committee meeting. We'll make sure we'll have that. I'm not sure we should necessarily change it since we didn't have any design committee meetings in the last 12 months. But we will be selecting a chair and alternate for the design committee meeting. And I looked at the city council's agenda for next week, and they do not have boards and commission appointments on next week's agenda. So we will not have a replacement for Charles by the first meeting in July, just if you're wondering. And I think that's all I have for tonight. I think that's enough.
Does the commission have any comments or questions for staff?
Question, who's currently on design committee? Do we know? I know we know, but.
Loopy?
You on the spot, just so we can think about it.
John, you are the chair, and I think Tracy, you're the
Tracy's the alternate? Yeah, that sounds
Okay.
right.
If not, John, you are the chair, and Tracy, you're the alternate.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just, it's great to be back. Thank you all for making this happen.
Yes.
Thank you guys for the last year and all the work that went into it. We've said it over and over, so I don't need to rehash it, and I know everybody wants to get out of here, but it's very nice to be back and appreciate all your effort. And welcome, Joe.
Thank you.
I agree, and much easier to be back.
Anything from this side?
Ditto.
Okay, with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion.
Second.
Motion by Martin. Keppers.
Did you get that?
Yes.
Aye.
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 Aye.